Okay, welcome everyone. It is absolutely wonderful to have everybody here. Thank you so much for coming to our second conversation with an Israeli leader, this time, of course, Rachel Azaria, who is really involved in the front lines of everything that is going on in Israel right now. And before I start, I also just want to thank the Federation for their support of this event as part of their Israel 75 project. So I don't want to take up any time, so I will just say that when Ned and I were discussing weeks ago already how we could have discussions about Israel, of course, one of them that came up was about the various political developments that were going on vis-a-vis the courts, etc. No one could have foreseen where just exactly how timely this event would be. So we are just extra grateful to have everybody here with us today and to be able to have this conversation. I'm also just want to thank Ned for really putting this all together. For those of you who weren't here last time, as I said, Ned is both a wonderful member of Ohev Shalom and also a professional in this area. He serves as a teaching associate professor of international relations at GW and an Israel Institute teaching fellow. So I want to just let him take it away. Thank you everyone for coming. As you can see, we are recording it and we will make the recording available as soon as it is ready.
All right. Thank you so much, Ruth. And thank you so much, Rachel, for being with us today in the midst of this historic and fateful time in Israel. As Ruth implied, Israel is experiencing a wave of protest unlike any in the country's history. For 3 months, hundreds of thousands of Israelis have demonstrated weekly against the government's plan to overhaul the judicial system. And last weekend, even larger numbers demonstrated spontaneously in the middle of the night and throughout the night, and brought about a significant change, certainly in the government's planned campaign, though not necessarily in the result. So we're very privileged today to have Rachel Azaria, who is one of the leaders of this movement, here with us. She's here to share her insights from the front lines and her vision for strengthening Israeli democracy. So just a little background on Rachel. Rachel Azaria is currently the CEO of Darkeinu, which means Our Way. It's a civil society organization working to amplify the voices of moderates and to push back against extremism in Israel. Rachel was elected to the 20th Knesset as a member of the party Kulanu, which is all of us, serving on the Finance, Foreign Affairs, Defense, and Ethics committees from 2015 to 2019. Before this, she was a deputy mayor of Jerusalem and a member of the Jerusalem City Council with a list, if I'm not mistaken, called Yerushalmim, the Jerusalemites. Rachel has extensive experience with the Supreme Court, appealing on issues related to women's rights and especially protecting the rights of Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox women. She's the chair of the Israeli Union of Environmental NGOs, and she is the author of The Guide to Revolution, which is a step-by-step manual for effective social change. So Rachel chose today's title, Israel, the Struggle for the Jewish Democratic State. And I know that for you, that struggle didn't just begin a few months ago. When I met Rachel 2 years ago, you were working on a project to try and create ways of making democracy in Israel, not just a system of government, but a core part of culture and identity, as you saw it in the United States. So now, for 3 months, a democratically elected government is trying, and is still at the threshold of succeeding, to weaken the judicial branch in a way that removes any effective limits on government power. At the same time, there are now hundreds of thousands of Israelis who have spent months in the streets chanting, "Demokratia, demokratia." Is this the moment you were working for? Is this the best of times or the worst of times? Tell us about this moment and about this movement.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you, Ned. I'm happy to be here. And And I have a lot to say, but I'll start by saying that this is more than anything, it's the best of time and the worst of times, but I think that's something that's very important. And also this conversation is part of this, is that suddenly everyone is looking at Israeli democracy in Israel and also a lot of our friends around the world. So this is part of it. So thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I started my relationship with the Supreme Court almost 15 years ago, 2008. I was running for city council in Jerusalem. And during the campaign, we wanted to put posters on buses like all the other candidates had. And the bus company wouldn't have my poster on the bus because I'm a woman. And at the time, there was a decision that there are no pictures of women in Jerusalem. We didn't know that. We discovered at that moment. To make a long story short, went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court made it clear that you can't decide. The bus company has no right to decide that men can have their pictures on the buses and women can't. And the Supreme Court made the decision. And since then, this became like almost part of my identity in a sense, going back and forth to the Supreme Court. Later on, we discovered there are buses that women have to sit in the back of the bus, and we joined the petition to the Supreme Court on this issue. At a certain point, ultra-Orthodox women started calling me to tell me about different segregation, disappearance of women from public sphere in their neighborhoods, and asked me to go to the Supreme Court on behalf of their rights. And this is, I think, this short introduction, I think it shows how much the Supreme Court is part of many decision-making in Israel regarding women's rights, regarding state and religion, regarding LGBTQ rights, regarding minority rights. The Supreme Court is very important in that sense. The problem is that most Israelis don't really know that. I mean, if you ask probably, any student at university in the United States, not any, but many, list me 5 Supreme Court verdicts that are very important ones. They could probably, I don't know what, say 3, 4, 5. In Israel, people might probably know one. It's the one that forced the Israeli army to make it possible for women to be in combat units. Alice Miller, her petition to the Supreme Court, but we don't really know. It's not part of our discussion of being Israeli. It's not part of the history we study. It's not part of our Israeli story. So that's the place for the Supreme Court. And that's why when this government was formed, the idea that they had was that it would be very easy to pass these kind of legislations, the judicial overall. And the thought was that would be kind of shakanor, they just come in, pass the legislation very quickly until the people will wake up, it will be very late. I also want to remind you that these were the 5th elections in less than 3 years, or 3 years, something like that. When every election, time after time, it was 60, 61, 60, 61. It was very hard to form a coalition. And the fact that there were 5 elections, first of all, everyone is very tired. We call it election fatigue, which is a funny term, but when you have so many elections, that's what happens. And also because there were 64 mandates, which is 4 more, it's like, okay, 3 more than what you have to have. So the idea was, that's it. We won and it's over. The game is over. When this happened, I just became the CEO of Darkenu, at that time. I started the role 4 months ago. And we were very, very nervous that people won't understand how dramatic this is and that people won't be out in the streets. And we started the campaign and, we were trying to convince people, and we had people, activists standing in different centers of towns in Israel, cities in Israel, talking to people about what's happening and how important it is to go against it, and signing petitions and trying to really but nothing was really moving. And then the minister of the justice system, Yariv Levin, I think because he thought that we were so tired and that no one would do anything, he went and he gave this speech that got everyone really, really nervous. So I think it's kind of, he thought it would be so easy that he went and he talked about everything that they're planning. And their plans were so radical. And it includes the fact that any legislation, if the Supreme Court says that it's against our basic rights or basic rules, they can override it. That the judges are elected by the members of mainly the members of the coalition, that you can't go to the Supreme Court on behalf of someone else. So like the ultra-Orthodox women that asked me to go to the Supreme Court because they can't go, that won't be an option anymore. Many legislations that really change, they really change our democratic system, and we kind of lose our checks and we lose our checks and balances. And that was the moment that everything changed. People just got out on the streets understanding what's in stake. And since then we've been active for 13 weeks, week after week, every Motzei Shabbat, every Saturday night, Motzei Shabbat, out in the streets. Very quickly it became also another day during the week when they started the real legislations. So once a week, everyone was in Jerusalem. And then later on, we had always Motzei Shabbat and another day during the week, and everything got very, heated up. When we started, we realized that what we do is we try to talk to more the moderate majority, and right-wing people. And it was clear that if we talk about women's rights, which I totally believe in, or we talk about minority rights or LGBTQ rights or anyone else, this is something that the right wing will say, okay, that's like the democratic part of it. So we started talking about the issue that the Supreme Court in Israel protects Israelis from the International Court in Hague. That is an issue that is very important. Every Israeli is drafted to be a soldier in the Israeli army. And this is part of what we have to do. And if the government expects you to bomb in the Gaza Strip, and that's something that our pilots do, even if we try to make sure that there is no one there that isn't supposed to be in the attack, often there are civilians there, even if we make a very big effort. And we know that the Palestinians have been trying to take us to the International Court in Hague on these issues. And because the Supreme Court, because we have our independent judicial system that is willing to take on trial soldiers that don't behave appropriately. So we know that that's what protects us from the International Court in Hague. This was the line that we took in Darkenu. We started talking about this. People at first didn't believe us, but very quickly the army and the Mossad and the Shabak, all of our forces started talking about this, and also the pilots started saying, we're not going to go on Miluim if we afterwards can't leave the country, because that's actually what it means. That was part of the Goldstone, the work that Goldstone did on the Israeli army, and this was a real fear. So that was one big campaign. We held it outside of Yariv Levin's home because we realized that we need someone from the that will be clear that he's the one that's threatening the Israeli soldiers. And very quickly we started demonstrating outside of Yoav Gallant's home. Yoav Gallant, he's the minister of the defense forces, and we know that, and we know that he understands these issues. And we also knew that he has a strong character, and that it's part of a campaign of who will be the successor of Netanyahu. So we chose to do there a lot of campaigning. The other big campaign we had was, we called it I Love Bagatz. Bagatz is the Israeli Supreme Court. And we were very active on this because we thought that we need to kind of push the envelope, talk about what we believe in, not only what we're against. The center left, or more liberal people in Israel for many years now have been talking against Netanyahu, but not so much pro what we believe in. So these were two big campaigns. You know the end of the story, at least at this point. It's just part of the story, but at this point, really at the end, you have Gallant. He said that he can't vote for this issue, mainly because of the issue of the Supreme Court, how it will affect the Israeli soldiers, and also because that many soldiers started saying, you know, we're not taking double risks. Also giving our time, also taking risks on our lives, and also they're later taking risks that we can't leave the country, triple risks. And this is something that he realized that the price will be very high. And it's just the same time that we know that the situation in the Middle East is, let's put it this way, it's not very calm. So Gallant came and talked about it to Netanyahu, and then Netanyahu basically decided to fire him from his position. It didn't actually happen, which is very interesting. He never gave him the letter of resignation, and it never actually happened. So at this point, there was a declaration that Gallant will not be the defense minister, but he actually is still acting as one. So this is very interesting, and it could be also kind of a political game that they're playing. Netanyahu is playing, but he doesn't really want to get rid of him because he knows that the price for the Israeli security could be very high. So I hope I gave a bit of the background. I'll move on to talking a bit about what's happening in Israeli society, if that's okay.
Absolutely, but I do want to say that you shared with me one of the slogans that you feel was very effective, and I thought it's very clever. So didn't want
Bagat Shachpatz.
Yes.
Yeah, Bagat Shachpatz. That's what we did when we talked about the Israeli protecting the Israeli soldiers from the International Court in Hague. Shachpatz means the shield that you wear when you go into combat. And it basically means Bagatz is the shield of the soldiers, which is talking about the importance of the Supreme Court from kind of more of a security background, or right wing kind of, or center right, something that a lot of people can relate to. So
yes, and just to clarify for the audience, it is assumed that if the Israeli Supreme Court is unable to investigate Israeli soldiers for war crimes or improper actions, that then they will immediately they will be referred to the International Court, and many people would be unable to leave.
That's according to the Rome
statute.
Statement. That's the legal situation.
Yes, it would be one of the, I want to also remind the audience, so please send questions for Rachel in the chat. You can send them to Ruth and myself, and we will try to get everyone's questions, or if the topics that people are raising to Rachel in the course of our conversation. One of the questions that I certainly have and seems to loom very large in this is the question of, in Israel's famously divided society, who is part of this mass protest movement, or who joined at different times, who is not out protesting, or who is protesting for the government and against I mean, you guys are just called the protest in Hebrew at this point. They just call you the protest, but yeah.
So the protest movement started the beginning as kind of a left-wing movement from the very beginning. Very quickly, it became very centrist. After Yariv Levin, after he spoke and after people started understanding, and the more information started coming out of what's happening, more and more Israelis are protesting. We see, it's interesting because a lot of people that are protesting now, it's the first time in their life they ever went to a demonstration. So this is very interesting. A lot of people say it's the first time. I also see them in the protest. They're like, it's people at during the first demonstrations, you can see they don't know what you do at a demonstration. Like, there are kind of codes, what you do, how you behave, when someone gives you a sticker, and you could see that they didn't know. And also a lot of the speakers, like in every city, there are a lot of demonstrations in different cities in Motzei Shabbat. And you can see the difference. Like in Herzliya, someone was saying the speaker before me, it was a few weeks ago, he said, Herzliya is a very wealthy city. He said, we will demonstrate every Motzei Shabbat, and we will go once a week to Jerusalem. We will take our vacation days to go once a week to Jerusalem, and this year we won't go on a ski vacation. So this is something usually you don't hear in demonstrations, okay? That's not the kind of speeches they're used to hearing, but really, this is not the usual crowd demonstrating. I think that's also what convinced the ministers and made things kind of shaky for the government when they realized that it's not, the usual suspects. As time went by, there are more and more also Orthodox demonstrating. There's a demonstration in Efrat, which is in Judea. There are demonstrations, more and more Mizrahim are joining the demonstration. Let's say in the second Sunday about Mizrahim Ashkenazim. There are more and more people from the Likud that vote Likud, but they say this is not about right-wing, left-wing. And we can see that the demonstrations are spreading more and more. We see that the legitimacy of the government for the judicial overall is dropping. We see that also in polls that are being held, the Likud is losing mandates. And it seems that the groups that are interested in the judicial overall are not the classic Likudnikim. So who is pro? Like, it's kind of the perfect storm, because the ultra-Orthodox need these legislations. They need to weaken the Supreme Court because of everything that has to do with joining the army. Today, the fact that the ultra-Orthodox don't join the army, it's not settled in legislation because of issues of equality. There have been discussions for the past 20 years, and this is something that has to be decided. They want to pass legislations that basically say they don't have to join the Israeli army. The Supreme Court won't allow that because it's against equality. So that's number one. Number two has to do with the extreme right wing. They really want this judicial overall to pass because of issues that have to do with settling in Judea and Samaria. In the West Bank, that's something that's very important to them. And so that's number two. Number three are everything that has to do with Netanyahu's cases in court. So like, this is kind of the perfect storm. So whoever doesn't relate to them, that's a different, usually they oppose. There's another group that's very important, and those are the Mizrahim. I know that's an issue that's not often discussed, but Mizrahim and Ashkenazim is a big issue in Israel. Now suddenly we see how it's starting to be discussed. And the discussion is that there are barely any Mizrahim that serve as judges in the Supreme Court. There was usually one all the time, only one, just one. No more than one. So some of them are against the judicial overall and some are pro. So this is kind of, I think, the way it's laid out in Israeli society.
So I'm also noticed certainly aspects of the protests, both things that you have mentioned about women's rights being very important, precedents, the most important, a lot of them important precedents at the Supreme Court are connected to women's rights. There are women very visible in The Handmaid's Tale costumes, and certainly with your background and many years of advocacy on women's issues, as you mentioned in Jerusalem, against some of the legislation pushed by ultra-Orthodox parties to remove women from public spaces and public spheres. How does that intersect with the protest movement?
So there are a few groups that are very, very active in these demonstrations. One is one of the women with these really very, very, very terrifying, but very powerful demonstrations. The other sector that's very active is the high-tech community. I think more than anything, I think that's the surprise of this campaign. That's one of the reasons there's also funding for some of the funding also comes from the high-tech community in Israel. They realize that if Israel stops being a democracy, or if the democracy is questionable, they're going to lose so much. Because one of the reasons that you have investments in Israel is because that Israel is known for its strong democracy. So this is a sector that really, came out there. They're holding protests. They're very, very active, very vocal about it. So that's the second group. The third group that's very active are like reserve units. That's a very active group. The three groups, I think something that is very noticeable is that the communities, secular people don't have very strong communities usually. Usually communities, like religious people have strong communities. Secular people usually don't have strong communities. And basically these are three very strong communities. Women have communities, usually activist women, feminists. The Miluim, the reserves, they have their WhatsApp groups, like they're organized. Former pilots, former Navy, former paratroopers, they're also organized. And also the high-tech. And I think that's one of the reasons they got organized so quickly. There are other groups that are very vocal. It's everything that has to do with our economy. They were very vocal. The LGBTQ community at the beginning, they were very vocal. Now, I think, there are other groups that are out there, but it's interesting to see how this kind of played out. It's not obvious. But at the end of the day, we got very big crowds and a lot of organized crowds. I'll say there are other like small, it's organized by cities. Every city has its Motzei Shabbat demonstration, Saturday demonstration. It's organized also by teachers, have also their community that they're organizing protests. And we see how every group is organizing kind of a protest. And something I think that's very important to know about these demonstrations is that they're not organized. I mean, there is a group that kind of coordinates, but it's basically, you want to hold a demonstration, you just hold a demonstration. You want to do it, Sunday morning outside of your children's school, you have Sunday morning outside of your children's school. You want to have, Tuesday, and all the high-tech community goes. It's not very coordinated. It's a bit coordinated. It's not organized. They're like background organizations like Darkenu that we support the protests. There is there is a headquarters of the protest that supports protests, but it's basically, you want to you just do it. Get up, organize, and get out there, and people come. And I think that's also a very powerful part of these protests.
So I'm starting to get questions from our audience, and a number of people are asking, and I think this is a big question. The protests, reached a fever pitch after the defense minister was fired. I don't even know the numbers, 600, 700,000 people. The economy shut down, a general strike declared. And that finally led to just a pause on the legislation. It did not lead to ending the legislation or changing the legislation, just a pause. And now that Pesach is coming, and Israeli national holidays, Memorial Day and Independence Day, there's going to be a month recess in which the Knesset doesn't meet, so the legislation won't advance for 1 month. And there are compromise talks now being sponsored by Israel's president, Bougie Herzog. Do you think there is, I've had a few questions. Is there a chance for those talks to succeed? Is there even a reasonable compromise that could be made?
Okay, so yes, we're just, and I'll say there's a lot of discussion going on in Israel, like, are we happy? Is this good? Like, what does it mean? are they just trying to get the demonstrations, to rest, and then they'll come back and just pass it quickly before we notice? I think that what we did is pretty amazing, but it's one step out of many, many, many. And we just need to know that this is what's happening. Nothing is over. As far as the parliament is on recess, so we know that we have time till the next gathering. That's right after the Yom Ha'atzmaut. And now there are discussions with the Nasi, at the president's house. I want to say that it's not exact. It's not that the legislation they started with was much larger. They left only the issue of how the judges are appointed. Everything else they dropped along the way. But we know that if they change the way judges are appointed, a lot of the other issues, the reason they gave up the rest is because this is what's most important to them. I don't know if there can be a compromise. I think it has to do with how, there's no easy compromise. Okay, let's put it that way. There's no easy compromise. Any compromise will be a challenging compromise. But I can see some sort of compromise, like maybe to say one judge will be appointed, kind of in a different way, but we will just change the law for these 6 months and then it automatically goes back. Like I can see solutions. None of them are good, but I can see something. If there is goodwill from both sides, I can see solutions that let both sides feel that they won enough and gained enough to put this issue aside for a while. But it's a lot up to how much goodwill there is. I think it will be hard at this point. On the other hand, some vacation, a bit trying to work on it, it could work. It is challenging for Netanyahu because if he gives in, so the extreme right wing he'll pay a price, this extreme right wing. They aren't, they have less to lose by dismissing this government. So that's a challenge. At the same time, he's also losing mandates to the center. So at this point, he's losing in many, many ways, Netanyahu, which isn't good for this kind of a conversation, for this kind of a negotiation, because that the weaker he becomes, the harder it will be for him to compromise. That's the way it usually works in politics. I think if he won't feel so weak, but then that on the other hand, he has to feel threatened. So he has to feel threatened, but not too weak. And I don't know exactly where we are. I hope that was clear enough. That's like very political.
The US government and now the US president, among many other countries, many other countries have said they are worried, they are concerned, but the US president was really unusually direct in remarks yesterday, saying, essentially that Israel cannot continue down this path. And he was asked if Netanyahu or when Netanyahu will be invited to the White House. He said not in the near term. So those are unusually direct remarks and direct criticism. How do you think that will influence the debate in Israel and the future of this legislation?
The debate in Israel, I think it strengthens already what's happening. People understand that it's not okay. It's not just something that passes and everything is okay. At the beginning, the way the government tried to address it is like, we're just, we're kind of correcting something that had to be corrected for the past 30 years, since the 90s, since Aharon Barak was the head of the Supreme Court. So it's just some kind of correction, and we're going to do it. We're going to correct. We're going to bring justice for everyone, and it's pro-democracy. It's strengthening Israeli democracy. That's what they tried to say. Now it's hard to say that, as more and more, I talked about the pilots, the economy, the high-tech community, all of that. So the president of the United States is part of it. Immediately, I don't know if it was noticed in the United States, immediately several ministers from the Likud, from Netanyahu's party, basically said, we don't care about the president of the United States, kind of, went against it, but it's not very convincing. Israelis love the United States. We love Americans. We love, you're our friends. You've always been our friends. And I think that's something that would be very hard to convince Israelis, except for the extreme right wing, the ultra-Orthodox. Those, I think, those are crowds that see it very differently. I don't know regarding the legislation, how, if it will pass or not, because I think there are many other issues that are being, in debate. There was this piece, I don't know, we don't know if it's true, but there was a report in the newspapers this morning that the fact, I don't know if the airports were shut down for 24 hours just before Netanyahu said, we're going to freeze the legislation. And apparently Netanyahu asked the airports to shut down. The head of the how do you say, the workers,
the Airport Workers Authority.
Yeah, but there's whatever. So the head, he's a Likudnik, and Netanyahu asked him to shut down, and then he's like, I have no other choice but to stop the legislation, to freeze the legislation. So basically, maybe Netanyahu can use the American statement to kind of say, listen, even though I really want to do it, this is not the right moment. That could happen, but really it's hard to tell at this point what direction he's going to choose and how much the president can really push on these issues.
I've had some questions also. How can, we've talked about the American relationship a bit, and I know that when you were speaking about on your democracy project, you were looking at the United States as a model, and the fact that our holidays are about democracy and our whole identity is rooted in democracy. But there's now a question: how can we in the U.S., the ordinary people who are concerned, how can we support democracy in Israel?
Wow. So I think that everything, I'm sure there are petitions, sign petitions, talk about it. Say how important it is to you. Talk about the fact that Israel, something that was always very helpful for the American Jewish community, protecting Israel, is the fact that Israel was, always declared as the only democracy in the Middle East. So talk about these issues. We know that a lot of the aspects of what we call hasbara, or against BDS. A lot of these campaigns are held by right-wing Israelis. And if you talk about the fact that it makes it harder for you to fight against BDS, that's very, very powerful. Something that the right-wing tried to say, they're trying to say that the demonstrators are basically promoting BDS by saying that there won't be investments, that it's the end of democracy, and therefore it makes it easier for investors to leave Israel. So we say, we're not establishing it. That's what you're doing, and we're kind of reacting to it. But I think it's important to understand that this is a kind of discussion that we have in Israel. If you talk about the fact that because of these legislations, it would be harder for you to protect Israel in different campaigns, different BDS campaigns against Israeli society, this is very powerful for right wing. And I think that it's important to remember that at the end of the day, we need to do two things to really win in this campaign, or to protect Israeli democracy. One is to make sure that a lot of people go out to the streets, and to make sure that people understand the stakes are high. At the same time, I think that what's very important, that's something I wrote about in my book, Guided Revolution, is about the fact that you need to convince right-wing people how important this campaign is. So we're doing it through Bagat Shachpatz. Bagat is the shield of the Israeli army. And I think that you can do it a lot through talking about the fact that the strength of Israeli democracy, the strength of the Supreme Court, really strengthens the protection of Israel from BDS, from different campaigns against Israel in countries around the world. So I think that even more so, the fact that you live in DC, like, you know, there's something about that that could be very powerful if you want to hold that kind of campaign. I think that would be amazing.
So on that topic, I want to ask a very hard question that I think everyone certainly is on the minds of many people in the U.S. How do we're talking about Israel's democracy, and we're all familiar, and we see in front of us that Israel has tremendous democratic freedoms and internal criticism and a strong judiciary and a free press and all of these things. At the same time, we know that for 55 years, Israel has had undemocratic rule over the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. There's a different status to some degree, but still. And how are these things related? I'll stop there. And how do you respond to that when people say you're protesting for democracy in Israel, but Israel's democracy is limited to the Jews in Israel or to the Israelis?
Okay, so first of all, Israeli democracy is not limited to the Jews. And also we'll talk about Judea and Samaria or the West Bank in a minute. All of the citizens of Israel enjoy Israeli democracy and enjoy the power of the Supreme Court that protects different minorities, including Arab minorities, obviously. So I think as far as our democracy, there, that's one story. Regarding the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, the Supreme Court, any Palestinian that feels that either settlements or the Israeli army or something is harming his rights in some way, they can appeal to the Supreme Court, and that's something that really annoys the settlers, because they want to build a house, and then some Palestinian can come up and say, we own this land, or even there are organizations that say, we know that this land is owned by a Palestinian, and there's a discussion in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court often decides that either they can't build or that houses that were built have to be torn down. These are big issues that are being discussed. So one of the reasons people don't like the Supreme Court is because the Supreme Court protects the Palestinians. So I think that has to be part of the discussion. I will say that Israel, if you talk to Israelis regarding peace process, or as far as Israelis are concerned, and I think it's just important to know that we tried the Oslo Accords and we weren't successful. We got buses exploding in our streets. We tried the disengagement from the Gaza Strip, and we got rockets in our cities. And the feeling now is that we don't really know what to do. I mean, it's not really surprising that this is not an issue that's being discussed now. Because in the 90s and the early 2000s, people really thought that, we have the solution, we can make this happen. At this point, this feeling in Israeli society is that we don't have an answer, we don't know what to do. And there still is a lot of concern about this, but it's not that there is an operative kind of, something that we can do that will really make a difference right now. So that's where we're standing.
Thank you. I've had a number of questions that, I wouldn't ask anyone to try and predict anything, because everything that's happened, I think no one would have predicted and is remarkable. But I've had questions about outcomes. So let's say, we said, is this the best of times? Is the worst of times? Could you, the scenarios that you think could come out of this, perhaps, or just even, let's say, what happens if the legislation does pass and what happens if it doesn't?
Okay, so I'll say I'm optimistic, because I think Israelis have shown a lot of power, a lot of resistance, which isn't obvious, and people everywhere around the world people are surprised. So I will predict one thing, okay, that the next stage is going to be very hard because the right wing is getting organized with their campaign. Like till now, we were the only ones campaigning in the streets. That's something that we need to figure out. If this big legislation passes, which I don't think at this point will actually happen, but if legislation passes without the agreement, without the discussion at the president's, there'll probably be an appeal to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, unless it's something very small, will probably say that it's illegal. This will bring us to a constitutional crisis. Everyone will have to decide, who they're listening to. It would probably be the army, and the government usually just, there are not many discussions with the Supreme Court, but the army and the police will have to decide who are they loyal to. This is very challenging. I hope we don't get there. At the same time, and on the other hand, if there is some kind of agreement, I think everyone will try to lower the flames. So, I think those are the two options. The one is very scary. The other one is, gives us more optimism. But I think the fact that the Israeli army is talking about the challenge in these legislations can kind of give us the hint of what will happen with the Israeli army. But to get to a constitutional crisis is not something that I think anyone really wants to get to.
Thank you. You have mentioned many times the army and that as sort of the, maybe the tipping point, both in terms of the campaign and the defense minister being fired. If there's a constitutional crisis, I'm sorry. Excuse me. So sorry. I'm gonna have to, it's embarrassing, but it happens. Excuse me. It seems in the, sorry.
You want me to pick up?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So what I was talking about, and I think that's what you want to ask, is what happens if what does it mean if who the army goes with, and how the army has been playing out in this campaign. And I want to say a couple of things about that. First of all, the fact that the army is so strong, that is, on the one hand, is pretty amazing for this campaign, but on the other hand, it's also a challenge. It can't be that at the end, the protectors of Israeli democracy come from the army. That's I think in the long run, this is like it. It could be a challenge, and I think it strengthens the understanding that we need to deepen democratic values in Israeli society. We can't just count on the fact that the army will protect our democracy. When the army protects democracy, that's not a good democratic situation for a country. But that's what we have at this point, and that those are the cards that we can play with. But in the long run, we will have to invest in Israeli democracy, and establishing a democratic narrative, democratic ethos, strengthening democratic values through popular culture, popular art, books, movies, everything that really can bring these democratic ideas to every home in Israel. So, Ned, you're back with us.
I apologize for that. I've had also received questions about a constitution. Israel doesn't have a constitution because the founders feared that they wouldn't be able to agree, particularly given religious secular divisions. It also seemed that, to me, the social contract, the reservists' protests, they seem to be saying, you've torn up the social contract. Our contract was we will volunteer, we will risk our lives, as you said, to defend a democratic country. And you're now changing that. Is there a chance to write a constitution or to somehow rewrite the unwritten social contract?
A constitution is going to be very challenging, and it goes back to the fractions of Israeli society, the tribes that don't want the Supreme Court. Equality is a word that is, the ultra-Orthodox will never, they won't agree to it, because of women's rights. That means that in the rabbinical courts, I think, where does it put the rabbinical courts? Where does it put so many aspects of their lives? That's also the reason they don't like the Supreme Court. So it's going to be very hard to establish a constitution in Israel, to write an Israeli constitution. But that's something that everyone is talking about. I think in your question, if are these the best times or the worst times, I think they're very good times because we're talking about this. We're finally talking about the challenge. We're not ignoring it anymore. So that's the answer regarding the constitution. Referring to the Israeli, like our society, how it's built. This is going to, I think we're kind of rewriting the Israeli story. If we look at the American history, and we're very similar countries in the sense that we're new countries of people that came from all over the world trying to, look at a future dream or future country that, kind of pioneer country that was built out of, by the people. So it's kind of similar to the American Civil War, that basically in the Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln wrote out what does it mean to be an American, and what are the commitments, and what brings Americans together. And I think that we're in a cultural civil war. We have to figure out, what does it mean to be an Israeli? What does it mean to be a democratic Jewish country? How does it work? How do we make this thing work together? How do we make all of these musical instruments that everyone plays such a different tune? How do we make it work together? And it's not clear. We don't know how it's going to happen. It's probably going to take quite a few years till we can figure it out. But I think what's amazing is that we're finally talking about it, and instead of everyone looking for their own solution and people leaving the country or just kind of disconnecting, we're finally working together to figure it out. So we're in these very fragile moments on the one hand, but on the other hand, there are also moments that I think that we have there's a lot of hope that we didn't have a few years ago. And I really hope that we'll be able to establish this Israeliness that will work for many people. And as with my work, our work at Darkenu, a lot of the hope is that really the moderate voices will be much louder. The moderate Jewish democratic voices, Jewish Zionist, liberal democratic voices will be much louder, and will be able to work together on this kind of getting Israelis back together and around these topics.
I think when it's time for someone to give this Gettysburg Address, perhaps maybe you'll give it, or maybe you'll be involved in drafting it. Maybe you can start working on it.
I think we're probably a lot of people doing it together. That's how I guess, in the sense of what we see is happening now in Israel, as far as leadership. But yeah.
I think I think that's a very powerful note, and we are actually coming up to the end of our hour with you. I just want to thank you so much again for taking time amidst this historic struggle, and I think many of us here are watching and really hoping for some of the best of times outcomes that you described here. So we really thank you again, and we all want to say Chizku ve'imtzu, and Chag Sameach and Pesach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Chag Sameach. Thank you.